Maybe I can help them find closure. In some ways, they help me find closure.
In my head.
Hey everybody, I am still sick, hence the lollipop. I was debating whether or not it was a good idea to come out and take a walk today, but I have gotten into the habit of doing these vlogs and I like doing them, so here I am. And tonight I wanted to talk about closure after a relationship. I figured, I've been talking about my last relationship, and even though the entire relationship was incredibly frustrating in many different ways, and I don't want to paint the whole thing like it was one horrible situation, because there were good moments in there, although there were so many bad moments it kind of like crushes all the rest. But the worst part of all of it, in my opinion, like, I could handle a lot of the hard stuff that was going on in that relationship. Oh, the wind is gonna get me again tonight, guys. But the worst part for me, really, was the end of the relationship and trying to find closure afterwards. So let's talk about it. Okay, so I apologize for the last video that I did. It was very windy. It's windy again tonight, so hopefully it won't be too much of a problem. And I realized as I was editing that video that when I'm on like a main street, as much as I think I may be away from the car noise, it still shows up and makes it hard for you to hear me. So I'm going to try to avoid that. Let's see. Closure. So this relationship, my ex was breaking up with me, and I'd like to contrast that very quickly with the relationship I had before this one, because the relationship before that was the one where I attacked my ex and tried to kill him, basically, which is not something to be proud of, but I own what I do in my life, and that's what happened. So I broke up with him, and there wasn't like a ton of closure there, except that I made the decision. But then like a month or two later, I don't know, I guess I was just being emotional, and I was feeling grateful for the things in my life. Maybe grateful that I survived that, and like grateful that I was gonna go on a new path and make a change. I don't know. But I had sent an email out to like 25 people in my life, approximately, who I felt like were important people in my life, who mattered, who I just wanted to thank them for being in my life, and he was one of them, the ex that I tried to kill. It's funny, but it's not funny. And he saw that, and he responded to it, and he didn't believe that I meant what I was saying. Like, he thought that he got it by accident. And I kind of said, like, no, I really mean this. And for me, that was enough to feel like a sense of closure. But with my most recent ex, I still don't really have a sense of closure. And that's what I want to talk about. Not having closure, and what the grieving process looks like, and my experience with it. And this is what I do on this channel. I talk about mental health issues. So let's keep going, and we'll keep talking. The wind is pretty bad tonight, so I'll try to keep this one short. I'm trying to shield you from the wind, so you may have to deal with just not being able to see me very well. And I'll keep the camera close, which is why you got a close-up of my face, so the microphone can pick up my voice. But I didn't have closure after this relationship for a lot of different reasons. For one thing, my ex was the one breaking up with me, and I didn't want to break up with him. So there was that, and here comes a car, so wait a minute. Okay, and now I'm back. So My ex broke up with me. I wasn't the one making the decision to break up, and I wanted to work on the relationship. So that was one way that I didn't have closure. Another way was that he cheated on me multiple times throughout the relationship, and we never discussed it the way that it should have been discussed. You know, I had bought a book prior to this whole breakup happening. That same year, I bought a book called After the Affair. And that book explained, like, what are the things that couples go through after somebody has an affair, and it was very good. It was very insightful because it shows you both sides of things, and the person who did not do the cheating doesn't get off the hook. There's also stuff for them to examine, which I thought was kind of interesting. So, and just to be clear, I never cheated in any relationship, but including this one, obviously. Alright, well, I'm trying to find a place where there's not a lot of wind and I'm not succeeding very well, so here I am. So after that relationship ended, it was hard because the very first thing that hit me when the therapist asked me how do I feel about him wanting to break up with me was that I had to let go of the image that I had built up in my mind of what our relationship was going to look like, because I had been investing all of this emotional capital, if you will, in believing that we were going to go through therapy and then we were going to have a happy relationship finally, and that we were going to, you know, go on and maybe get married and have the life that I always kind of dreamed that I would have. Not that it's like some big major dream or anything of mine to get married, but I just always wanted to be in a successful relationship. You know, as a gay male especially, that matters. So I had to let go of that, and that was really hard to let go of. You know, I broke down crying in the session, incredibly upset. But it was not like that was dealt with in one day. That took months to get over, the idea that we were not going to continue on and be what I had hoped for. So that was one aspect that was difficult as far as closure. Another aspect, like I mentioned, was the cheating, and that was something I was just going to have to work on my own. He was not going to help me through that, so that was left dangling. And the biggest, I think, really was the friendships, because I didn't have any friendships outside of his friends. His friends became my friends, and unfortunately I didn't know this at the time, but he had ceded to his friends what a horrible person I was, so they had been cold shouldering me throughout our entire relationship. I didn't really understand why. I thought I had no idea what was going on. All I knew was that I didn't feel cared for. I didn't feel like they cared about my life, and when we were together, they would say, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you, I love you," and they would say that they cared about me, but when it came to their actions, when it came to the topics of discussion, they never really got into me at all. I was never part of the discussion when we were all hanging out together, so I already had some distance with them. However, like, I already had a tumultuous relationship with his friends. However, I still had to wrestle with letting go of those connections. Now, we also, the same year that we broke up, made a bunch of friends together. We went to a seminar together and met a whole crap load of people, and we became close friends with them, or at least I felt like we were close friends. Like, very quickly, we all kind of like globbed onto each other, and it felt like we were part of this like magical friendship kind of a thing, which should have been a hint that was not a good relationship with all of us right there. But those friendships were particularly painful to try to find closure with, because those people met us at the same time, and they had to start like choosing sides, so to speak. And needless to say, while this breakup was going on, my world was blown apart, and this is why the PTSD in my life like flared up big time while this was going on, and that's why the therapist was able to maybe recognize some of it. Alright, so I am gonna hope I can find a place to talk. It's really difficult where I am to find a good place to talk, but I want to talk about this, and I'm gonna do my best. Okay, let's see how I do here. I am on the main road, so I may have to interrupt my speaking a little bit as I do this. Okay, so I was talking about closure, and closure to me means grieving. Car. So closure to me means grieving, and I'm not super educated on grieving. I know that the traditional way that people talk about grieving is denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance, you know, all that stuff. I tend to go to the psychoanalytic version of grieving, which involves I don't understand why people turn their cars so slowly. It's creepy. Alright, so hold on, cars. So I tend to use the psychoanalytic view of grieving, which I go to object relations theory. And object relations theory, these are going to be so many edits when I go to put this together. Object relations theory means that we relate to the world as objects in our mind, and an object is just like a placeholder for anything. It could be time, it could be a person, it could be an actual object. So when we're grieving, what we're going through is the loss of an object, and that's happening in our mind. And the process involves wrestling with the object being there and the object disappearing, and how that feels. I have to move. Alright, I'm kind of out of the wind, hopefully. So, let's see. So one thing I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention was that my ex wasn't going to therapy. He wasn't doing anything that would have brought me closure. Every time we had a session scheduled, just about every time he would cancel that session, he'd have an excuse to move it to the next week. So there was no way for me to get closure through working with him. So it was up to me to find my own closure. Now, I take the psychoanalytic view of closure, which means I specifically look at object relations theory, as this is what I was saying before. And so in my mind, he was an object, and I was losing that object, and I had to grapple with that. So grief to an object's relations person, somebody who believes in object relations theory, is wrestling with this object no longer existing, and what does that look like in your mind when that happens. And typically what happens is you kind of wrestle back and forth with it. 1 second. So you wrestle back and forth with it, and this is true of anything, you know. In a way, I think it's easier sometimes when something dies, you know, a pet dies, a relative dies, or, not to discount, that's a horrible thing. I don't at all want to make it sound like that's easy to go through, but there's a permanence to that. You know, if your favorite toy is destroyed, for example, and I'm going through object relations view here. I'm not comparing people to toys, but it's the same concept. A toy is an object in your mind. So when something is permanently destroyed, I feel like that's easier because there's evidence like right there in front of you that this is not coming back. However, in the case of people that continue on living after a breakup, for example, it's harder because they continue living. So you have to grapple with, they're not in my life anymore, and yet they still exist. So what does that mean? And typically what it means is you start going through all kinds of different emotions. So you get angry, maybe you want to destroy it yourself, you want to destroy that person, that object. Maybe you want to bring it closer. Sometimes you feel like it's part of your identity, other times it's an enemy, sometimes it's a friend, and it's like this constant back and forth. And this can take months, years, sometimes for some people to work through. Because when you've defined yourself in relation to this object, it's almost like you've become entwined with them and intertangled. And it takes time to undo all of the knots and to break up all of the little fibers and things that connect you to that person. So, here we go with another car. So it takes time. It's not easy. In the case with my ex, it took months and months and months. And for me, it was painful enough that he just kind of like up and left. There was not really much discussion about what was going on, why he felt he needed to leave. He also went on to get with somebody else about 3 months after we were totally separated, at least physically. I should mention we also had a whole matter about moving out that there was no real good discussion around that either. Partially my fault because I didn't want to discuss it at that point because he had given me such disregard that I felt like, well, f*** you. So, let's see. So, closure. That's what we're coming towards here, right? So closure is wrestling with something still existing, but not existing in the capacity that you believed that it would. And, you know, in the death of a person, for example, typically a way to resolve that is to incorporate that person into you. So that lost object gets, like, reintegrated back into your sense of self. In my case, and I think for the many other people, when it's been like a traumatic relationship and it's been very confusing, you wrestle with those back and forth feelings. And for me, I don't think I ever get a sense of closure. I don't think I ever will get a sense of closure. It's always going to be what is known as ambivalent, which is actually a healthy thing. Ambivalence is healthy. Ambivalence is when you can feel two different emotions about something at the same time and not like lose it and not need to go into that black and white splitting thinking that I've discussed in earlier videos. So I see my ex in positive and negative ways. I typically lean towards the negative because of the way that he handled things, but he was abusive to me, emotionally abusive. And yet at the same time, there were positive memories in there, and I understand that the reason why he did the things that he did was probably because he's unconsciously got his own stuff that he hasn't worked out from his own past. So I can have some kind of grace towards that in my mind. So I'm always wrestling back and forth between when I conjure him up in my mind, it's always this back and forth of, well, I hate him, but he was important to my life, but he was an asshole, but sometimes we had good times together, and that's kind of all I get. There's no closure here. That's how I have to live my life and carry on, and that's very painful, especially in the beginning months. But as I've walked through life, it just is what it is. It's how I have to live. Something that was incredibly painful for me, however, were these friendships that we made together, where, you know, for him, I can kind of see, like, what's going on. Like, I knew him more intimately, and so I could understand why he would behave the way that he did, even though I obviously completely don't agree with any of it. But it hurt me when there's a helicopter flying above. I'm distracted. It hurt me to know that there were so many of these people who were new friends who and even old friends, even his older friends that I got to know, it was very painful to know that they also didn't give me any sense of closure. They never had discussions with me about what was going on. People who I really felt were some of the closest relationships that I had in my life. So that's saying something. Maybe they didn't feel the same way, but they didn't give me the time of day to even have a discussion about what was going on. They wouldn't even, and some of them may be watching, and, you know, if you are watching, like, we can still have a discussion. You probably don't care to. I mean, you've shown me that you don't care to, but that's how it's all resolved in my mind, is that, you know, they never really cared. That's the only conclusion I can come to, is that you never really actually cared about me, because you would have given me the time of day. You would have had the discussion with me. So that's the sense of closure that I get. It's not necessarily like a happy sense of closure here, right? You know, the ending of a relationship is not always a good thing, but the positive that's come out of this entire relationship for me is that I've been able to relate to people who've been through abusive relationships, who have been cheated on, who are going through difficult times in their relationships now, who need some kind of guidance, who haven't been there before the way that I have. And I can talk to them and I can guide them through and I can help them navigate whether their relationship is something that may be able to be saved or maybe it's not going to be able to be saved. And what does that look like? Maybe I can help them find closure. In some ways, they help me find closure. I have learned how to talk to people who I believe have the same patterns that my ex has had, and those people have helped me get some closure because I have been able to relate to them. Since he wouldn't have a conversation with me, I've had conversations with them and I've gotten to understand a little bit better what his motivations may have been. So that's what closure looks like for me. It's not always something you're going to get at the end of a relationship, and if you can accept that, I know that's not easy to accept. Again, there's that whole long period of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth that like racks your brain and makes you feel crazy. I get it. But that's just part of the grieving process. You know, those nightmares that you have, that's part of the grieving process. That's your brain trying to sort everything out. I want to be like kind of comforting here, but I also want to be realistic that's the way it is. When somebody treats you poorly and doesn't co-regulate with you to give you a sense of closure, you're left dealing with it on your own. And it's not a fun place to be. In my case, at least a dozen people left me with that feeling all at once. And it was very painful. And I know I don't really show a lot of emotion about it right now because for the most part I've dealt with it. But trust me, there were many, many, many nights of crying, many, many, many nights of anger, and they still happen. They still happen. When I bring him up in my mind, you know, I get very frustrated about the whole situation. So I've just accepted that this is closure for me. Closure is not closure. It's this paradox that happens, and I'm okay with that. For now, I'm okay with that because it drives me to talk with all of you and to figure out how can I change the world to make it more positive so that other people can get a sense of closure, so that the pain that I've endured doesn't have to be a pain that you endure. Here I am in my yellow light again. So, what did I want to say? You know, I wanted to like kind of wrap this up nicely, and I realized there's no nice way to wrap this up. Sometimes closure just doesn't happen, and that sucks. And for me, how I've dealt with not having closure is to incorporate it into my life and make it easier for other people to find closure. So I have become a person who people rely on for helping them through difficult times, and that's rewarding for me, and it helps me to give other people the closure that I never got. So, you know, and I have a support group for people who've been through trauma on Facebook, if that's something you're interested in. We are approaching 1,000 members, which is really cool. Not that it's cool that people have been through trauma, but it's cool because we have a really great community over there, and I'll leave it at that. We're very careful about how we talk to people over there. We don't stigmatize as much as possible. You know, I monitor to make sure things are going okay. So I appreciate that group. Hello, if you're in my group. Thank you for being there. I know I tell you guys this all the time, but I appreciate it. So let's see. What has your experience been with not having closure on things? You know, I've been talking about this one relationship with my ex. It's not the only thing in my life where I haven't had closure. So share your experience if you could. You know, sometimes just hearing from somebody else makes us feel a little bit less alone. So if you'll share what your experience has been like with not having closure and how you were able to deal with that and continue on with your life, I know that will help somebody. Leave that in the comments down below. If you could, I would greatly appreciate if you would subscribe. I am over the 300 mark, which is really cool. I'm trying to get to 1,000. I'm trying to get to 1,000 because a bunch of stuff unlocks for me once I get to 1,000. I can do mobile live streaming. I can, if I so choose, I could go to the YouTube space in New York City and attend classes, which would be kind of cool. It's an option. I don't know if I would do it, but I'm trying to get there, so it helps me if you subscribe. It notifies you if you hit the little bell when I get a new video out for you guys, and thank you. Let's just put it that way. Thank you for being here and watching, whether you're subscribed or not. I just wanted to say I am still sick, so if you don't see me in the next day or two, that's why. I will do my best to put out something. I was almost today gonna put out like a remix of my videos and try to like put some stuff together to hammer home maybe some key points. I don't know, just a thought. But if you don't see me live in my typical vlog thing that I do, that's why. It's because I'm sick. But thank you for being here. Remember to click subscribe. Remember to share your story below, and we'll talk again.